Hey everyone, it is Thursday, April 17, 2014, and right now we're going to talk about my MacBook Pro woes, Peter's desire for a refreshed OS 10.10, OS 10, 10.10, too many 10s, and all the week in Apple. This is the iMore Show. Joining me, as always, the managing editor of iMore.com and your internet bundle of joy, Peter Cohen. How are you, Peter?
Good. How are you, Renee?
Very good, thank you. Except I did the stupidest thing imaginable, Peter.
What did you do, Renee?
I was carrying my MacBook Pro around. I walked into my kitchen. I put it down on my kitchen counter. I turned around to get a drink. And as I turned back, it was just falling, like in slow motion, like in bullet time, off the counter and towards the tiles of the floor. And I just saw it land with like this thud sound. And then the screen just changed from all the beautiful windows I had open before to this sort of pane side-scrolling gray, white, black, panel of misery.
My heart bleeds for you, man.
I tried rebooting it. It would make the Wall-E sound, but it wouldn't really boot. I couldn't use an external display. I couldn't VNC into it. I couldn't do anything. So I ended up taking it to the Apple Store this morning. The screen was actually broken, and that's about a $700 repair for the entire unit. It was a potential that the motherboard or the GPU, basically the logic board, was broken. That would have been another $700. Luckily, I avoided that. However, when they ran their MRI test, Mac Resource Inspector test, it came up with a busted battery. And I've been having battery problems for months now, but it was always borderline, and I couldn't get it replaced with AppleCare, and because the battery on the Retina MacBook Pro 15-inch is part of the top case assembly, is a really expensive repair. So I decided to wait until it actually went past their point of failure. And now, coincidentally enough, it's done it. So I've got it back now, so I can edit the show afterwards. But then I have to bring it back to the Apple Store for changing.
Boy, that's awful. I've been there. You know, I've got dented and pieced and partsed laptops to prove it. It's never a pretty thing when it happens.
Well, I mean, I think like all of us, you've used your MacBook to block, fireballs and to land on when you jump out of Shield headquarters. I mean, these are what our MacBooks are for.
Yeah, I mean, mine's got carbon scoring. It's obviously been in a couple of scrapes with TIE fighters over its lifetime.
But it did the Kessel Run.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, unfortunately, you use a device every day, that's the risk you run. And the real problem here is that AppleCare doesn't cover accidental damage. AppleCare will cover any manufacturing defects or any problems that are related to wear and tear that aren't extraordinary. But AppleCare just extends the standard warranty for another 3 years. If you bust your MacBook, you're out of luck. The only exception to that is, in some cases, some people have credit cards.
Yes.
That provide some sort of damage insurance for devices that they buy. So, if you're watching this and something like this, you think something like this might happen to you or it's happened to you, check the credit card company that you use to pay for the repair. The other thing that is worth considering, actually, is something that some companies offer. Apple doesn't do it, but other Apple resellers, like the one that I work at, does offer a supplemental insurance package that does cover accidental damage. Sometimes even homeowners policies and stuff like that will cover it.
Yeah, and Apple actually recommend, like they said that when I bought it, and they go, check your credit card to see if it covers it. Check your homeowner policy. Their AppleCare Plus on iOS devices will sometimes give you reduced costs for replacing screens and things. I don't think there isn't an equivalent for the Mac. But like Matt W. is saying in our chat room, it's proof that the current tech isn't user serviceable. Yes and no. I mean, people say that a lot. I know Kyle Wyans from iFixit says that. Even Ali, from iMore, she used to run a repair service, and she says that too. But there's an opportunity cost to everything, and just saying it's not user serviceable is fine. But in order to make the product user serviceable, it would no longer be the product that we have. Like my giant cheese grater Mac Pro is infinitely more user serviceable than the new Mac Pro, but the new Mac Pro is tiny. Apple is making appliances now. They're not making computers anymore. And the reason the MacBook Air is so thin, the reason these Mac Pros are so thin and so powerful is because they've made them into appliances. And someone like me, Peter, I mean, I opened the hood of my car. My father built cars from scratch and rebuilt cars. He built a house for his father. I mean, that man could build stuff. I have no idea how any of that stuff works. Even if the computer was serviceable, I wouldn't be able to fix it any more than I could fix my car. So for me, appliance computing makes no difference, but results in better battery life, smaller, thinner, lighter computers.
You know, I hear what he's saying. It would be nice if Macs were user serviceable. They aren't. It would be nice if I had a food replicator in my kitchen. I don't. You know, that's not the world that we live in. You can either, you know, and look, this gives an opportunity for a disruptive market entrant here. If somebody wants to make a computer that's user serviceable and as well integrated and well designed as the Mac, go for it. I'll look at it with a completely open mind. I'd be very interested in a device like that. It doesn't exist. You know, it's not like if you drop your Toshiba off the corner of the kitchen counter, it's going to fare any better on that damn tile than your Mac did.
Yeah, I think the difference is, though, like, for example, the Toshiba or the Dell, at least back in the day, they would have various daughter boards on them, and you could just plug it out and plug in a new one, plug in a new CPU. Apple is not fusing the battery into the top casing because they're a bunch of a-holes. They're doing it because it saves a couple millimeters here, a couple millimeters there, and that's how they get these computers so thin. That's the trade-off.
Right, exactly, and we buy them based on the design and based on their overall usability. So, you know, look, it'd be nice, but it's not the world that we live in. That's the bottom line. You know, speaking of the top case of the Mac is what you're talking about with the battery, because on the Retina MacBook Pro, the underside of the top case near your wrists is where all the battery pack is. And that entire unit is one fused unit. If you develop a problem with your keyboard, if you develop a problem with your trackpad, as I'm now starting to have, that entire piece gets replaced. You know, it's that entire component. They can't just pop out a new trackpad and put a new one in, or pop out a new battery and put a new one in, or pop out a new keyboard or put a new one in, or new speakers, or any part of the machine that's connected to that particular component. So it's difficult. But look, you know, the alternative is that your computer isn't going to be designed the same way. It isn't going to look the same. It isn't going to operate the same way. So these are the trade-offs that we make for really miraculous engineering, like the Retina MacBook Pro. You know, it does pay to put a nice a case on it, but even something like that, I mean, how far was the drop? It was what, 2.5, 3 feet?
It was kitchen counter height, so probably 4 feet, maybe more.
So probably 4 feet or so, yeah. So I mean, that's a pretty extraordinary circumstance. I don't think any amount of component level repair is going to help you there.
Yeah, it's. I mean, again, like when my car needed body work, they just replaced whole panels. I know Sam and Dean would take the Impala out and hammer the dents out. Those are no longer the days we live in. Cars are controlled, but everything is incredibly complicated now, and it's how we manufacture it. And yes, there are you know, environmental issues. Although Apple's very good about using glass and aluminum and highly recyclable materials, but it's a choice you have to make. If you want something repairable, that you just have to buy something not from Apple, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that. A lot of people do it. Whatever.
All right, so over the last week or so, Peter, you've been writing a lot about OS 10 10.10. I know Nick in the chat room is saying he hopes that it's OS 10.11 if they do any significant changes. It's not. It's OS 10 10.10. That's what it's going to be called. Like, they'll get a code name, but it's going to be 10.10.
Yeah, you'll have to live with that awkwardness for a year, whatever.
You'll be driven as insane as Daniel Jalkut, but you'll have to live with it. So I don't know if you've turned around on this issue, if some of or if maybe just thinking it through has led you down it, but you seem to be going like all in on this idea of refreshing the OS 10 interface.
I really have. I would like to see it happen, and I just hope that my wishful thinking isn't clouding my expectation of what Apple will actually do.
So we discussed last week that, you know, there's still green felt in Game Center on Mavericks because Apple simply didn't have time to replace it. But it doesn't sound like you want an iOS 7ification specifically, but you want some of the ideals of more digitally native design to permeate into OS 10.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, OS 10 in some respects has not really had a major makeover in a very long time. I mean, you know, the last really hugely disruptive OS Mac OS interface change was from classic Mac OS, from Mac OS 9 to OS 10, and that was in 2000. You know, they unveiled the OS 10 interface, and Steve Jobs' comment on it. It was called Aqua at that point, the interface motif, and Steve Jobs called it lickable. You know, it was very 3D. It was very high gloss. It was
like
very
candy.
Trying to impress with these visual cues that we hadn't seen in an interface before. And the interesting thing is that in the intervening years, the entire computing market has kind of gone full circle from that 3D embellishment and that emphasis on skeuomorphism to back to a flat interface. So it's clearly a design trend, but you know, it informs how people who are coming to OS 10 use it. And as I've written about this, I've heard over and over again from people who say, you know what, you're absolutely right. I'm a new Mac owner. I've owned an iOS device like an iPod or an iPad for a while, or an iPhone for a while, but I'm new to the Mac. And making the visual interface for OS 10 more consistent with what I'm accustomed to, not only from iOS, but also from previous operating systems that I've used, whether that be Android or Windows or something else, would be helpful, because it would just be a more consistent visual experience from one system to the next. So I think there's a lot to be said for that, and I think that Apple's got very good reasons for not doing it in the past, but those reasons have kind of evaporated over time, because 50% of the people who are walking into Mac stores, to Apple's retail stores, and who are buying Macs for the first time. The number of people who buy Macs, you know, are a very significant number of them, of all these new users, have never used Macs before. So they want a more up-to-date interface. They don't care what we had 15 years ago. You know, they don't care what we had 10 years ago. And of course, Aqua wasn't the final evolution of OS 10 either. You know, Apple has made gradual changes over time. But so that's my justification, in my rambling, incoherent way, for why I think it would be a good idea for some flatter interface elements. And we see that. We see that in Mac apps, in Mavericks. You know, Maverick's got a redesigned calendar interface, for example, that sort of adopts some of these flatter interface characteristics. We also you know, have seen little bits here and there, and if you use iCloud on your Mac, you'll also get a similarly flat interface. That actually may give you some clue as to what a flatter interface might start to look like on OS 10. Obviously, iCloud is a little bit more specialized, but it does have that look that keeps it more consistent with iOS 7.
I think that's really interesting, and I started immediately thinking about the design precepts that Apple used on iOS 7, which were depth, deference, and clarity. Depth is interesting to me because depth involves, on iOS at least, these layers of, you know, sometimes with Gaussian blur in between them, but also the physics and particle engine that was built for iOS 7. So as you scroll through messages, for example, they bounce against each other. As you tilt the device, the wallpaper parallaxes behind it to make it look, you know, faux 3D. There's all these physical interactions on there. And a Mac, the iPhone has tons of sensors, and it's something you hold in your hand and is very susceptible to motion because of that. A Mac is something more often that's on your lap or on a desk. So I don't know if you would need the sort of it detects where it's moving. I know it has detection for things like it can power down a spinning drive if you drop it or something, but I don't know if you would need all of those sort of motion detecting effects. And I don't know if Gaussian blur on the Mac would look too much like Vista just because of that legacy.
Yeah, no, those are very good points. So, you know, obviously, and you know, Apple is keenly aware that OS 10 gets used in different ways than iOS does. You know, they understand that you don't just have a uniform user experience just for the sake of having a uniform user experience. It's got to make sense within the context of how the product works and what it does. And iOS and OS 10 are operating systems for entirely different things. But I think that one informs the other, especially for new users, and that's why making that interface experience consistent, at least when it comes to objects like icons or window elements, buttons, and so on, I think there's a very compelling case for it.
Baby Panther in the chat room just brought up the rumors surrounding Amazon's supposed upcoming phone. And the most outrageous of those is that it's going to have 4 front-facing cameras that it's going to use to do something similar to iOS 7, which is that sort of parallax 3D thing, but to a much larger degree. Something maybe closer to the Nintendo DS, or I forget the name of the Android phone, but there was an Android phone in 2011 that did a lot of that sort of fake 3D effects. At CES, I tried the Nintendo DS. I turned off the 3D immediately. Here's my problem with this, Peter, and tell me if I'm wrong or crazy about this. It's one of those things, and we discovered this with iOS 7 painfully when a lot of people got vertigo or motion sickness from it, and Apple had to give people toggles to turn off the parallax and to turn off the scaling. Human eyes were not designed to converge and focus on different planes, which is why a lot of people don't like 3D motion. So you will start to eliminate people from enjoying your product. And on iOS 7, it's not that bad because all you're doing is turning off computer-generated effects. You're reducing load on the GPU. But if you've got 4 cameras dedicated just to providing a fancy-dancy 3D interface, and it makes people sick, and you have to turn it off, you've now wasted 4 cameras on what should be an incredibly conservatively equipped device.
Well, who says that 4 cameras are actually going to do that?
The rumor people, Peter. They're all over the internet.
My point exactly.
For the sake of, have you played the DS at all? The Nintendo DS?
Yeah, sure.
The 3DS. What do you think of it?
The 3DS is interesting. I don't think that the 3D effect of the 3D screen is a home run. It can occasionally be used well. It's occasionally annoying. As far as the purported Amazon phone is concerned, it could be interesting. It could be that we've misunderstood how this technology is going to be used entirely. I'm always reluctant to sort of prejudge these things until I actually know what it is that it's going to do exactly, as opposed to what the rumor mill is telling me. So, is this going to be a standard user interface queue, or is this something that's only going to be used under certain circumstances? Is this something that's going to be used for games or entertainment specifically? Is this a basic UI implementation? What is it that they're looking to get out of the UI to make them do this, if that's the case? You see, there are just so many damn questions that I just don't have the answer to right now, Renee. This is why I hate to sort of take these individual data points, pull them apart, and assess what they mean before we actually know.
You're Gandalf at the riddles in the dark stage.
Yeah, pretty much. That's actually a good way of putting it. Whatever. Let Amazon have its phone. Amazon keeps other people on its toes. I don't care what anybody says. I think that Apple is as informed to, make the iPad mini better and the iPad better with Kindles in the world as much more so than they would be without it. So I'm glad that I'm glad if this is the direction that Amazon's going in, that it's going to do it.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think that's a really much saner take than mine. I just have this gut reaction to 3D effects. I leave them on iOS 7, but they don't really add anything to my experience. Like, if they weren't there, I wouldn't miss them. And it's just that, I have a television that can do 3D. I almost never use it. I don't think we've nailed 3D technology, and I know the phones that tried to do it in 2011 didn't nail it. I don't know if I need anything like that on OS 10. I don't know. 3D, everyone seems to think it's the next big thing, or at least Howard Stringer was all in on it being the next big thing, and various other people. And to me, at least, it seems like I would much rather have high color depth or even better quality panels and stuff like that. 3D is just not high on my want list.
Yeah. A 3D really isn't on mine either, and that's because I still haven't seen the technology work the way that it should. Like you were saying before, I don't think that human beings have evolved to look at 3D vision in a way that really translates well with the technology that we've got now. And I mean, you've heard me in the past be skeptical about the Oculus Rift, which gets rave reviews, it seems, from almost everybody who uses one. But I've got some just internal bias about having used these products before and what I think of them. So until I can actually get my hands on one, I don't really have many nice things to say about them, because I don't see from my use case how it's useful. However, in the same token, I recognize that not everybody has the same taste that I do or finds the same things important. So if Amazon hits a niche with this, great.
Yeah.
Just like Samsung, hits a niche with, the 9,000 different form factors that they make for each of their touch-based devices.
Truth. So after depth is deference, and I actually think OS 10 led the way with this. I mean, Snow Leopard, Apple got rid of brushed metal. They got rid of the pinstripes. Snow Leopard, to me at least, was a very deferential operating system, and we still have that. Even Mavericks, most of the windows don't have a lot of Chrome. They have the top bars, which are sometimes heavy, but the sides and bottoms, and a lot of apps, they're just completely naked. So I think that sort of thing has already been accomplished in large part.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that we haven't really seen a huge evolution in OS 10 since then, since Snow Leopard, and that was 3 major versions ago, right? Because it's 10.6 and we're in 10.9 land now, so maybe 10.10 is the time to turn the corner.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I would want just naked content windows everywhere that only showed me UI Chrome when I moved around, because Safari on iOS 7, it always seems like a lot of work to bring the controls back up, and I don't know if I have to scroll up or tap in the right place, or I think that's overdone, so I would hope for a little bit of pragmatism.
That's right. There absolutely should be a balance.
Yeah, so there's a very little else. It's one of those things that it always happens with Apple and me, Peter, is that it's impossible for me to see in advance, but then it seems very obvious in hindsight.
Well, that's one of the nice things about Apple, I guess, is that it always keeps you on your toes. You're right. I have the same problem prognosticating on Apple hardware. I'll get it in my head that Apple's going to do something, and then they do something entirely different. I remember last fall talking a lot about a cheaper iPhone and thinking that the iPhone was going to be significantly less expensive than it was, and it wasn't. So I suppose that I am guilty of adding to that false expectation that the iPhone 5C was going to be a truly cheap iPhone.
Yeah, I spoke to Jason Sinella about this yesterday, and it's going to be on next week's Vector. But this is not unique to gadgets. I mean, you and I talk about the upcoming Godzilla movie, and what we'd love to see in it, and what we wouldn't like to see in it. And I had a long conversation with Guy English about what I want to see in the next, Avengers movie and stuff like that. People talk about how they want to see sports seasons or who's signed with whom. There is an entire people are inherently curious, and I think those kinds of conversations just happen everywhere. But tech still is treated as an immature industry. So as much as someone might say, "Oh, I really hope Lamborghini sticks with the Rebenton body type when they make the Aventador," or something like that, it's treated as more oddly than it ought to be in technology still.
Truly.
Speaking of which, on MacBreak Weekly this week, and I wanted to get your opinion on this, we spent some time talking about the Mac Mini, the missing in action Mac Mini update, and
my favorite.
You're precious. And Leo and Andy were wondering whether Apple could go in a more Mac Pro style design for that. And in my head, I just immediately saw this black donut shaped thing. Because if you take a Mac Pro and you cut it to Mac Mini height, it would kind of look like a donut. But I don't know if the Mac Mini needs a redesign or if it just needs all that new Haswell and PCIe flash-based storage and just a technology, a guts upgrade.
Well, I'm spitballing here, but Johnny Ive's design philosophy is that is a very sort of Bauhaus-derived imperative to emphasize that function is or that the form of the thing is led by its function. The Mac Pro is designed the way that it is because it's got a lot of heavy-duty internal components that produce a lot of heat, and this is the most efficient way of getting that heat out of there and still keeping the thing looking quiet. It's not designed like a little turbine just because turbines are cool. I don't really see a use case for the Mac Mini that would dictate a turbine design, but maybe I'm wildly off base here. It occurs to me that Apple could make all of the changes that it needs to make the Mac Mini a modern Mac and make it a good value at its existing price point of $599 without reinventing the wheel much. Maybe shaving a little bit of height from it, or maybe modifying its width if it was no longer necessary to have all that stuff on the back. But other than that, why mess with it? The Mac Mini serves a very specific purpose in Apple's product line. It gives them, first of all, a very inexpensive server that they can sell to workgroups and small businesses. It gives them an entry-level Mac that people who are transitioning to the Mac for the first time can purchase and still reuse their existing peripherals, like their display or their keyboard or their mouse, the stuff that they've already invested in for their PC. It also helps people pick up Macs inexpensively who need them for, well, really a large variety of things. Schools use them sometimes. Businesses use them sometimes. I've got 3 of them in my house. They're my kids' computers. Each of them has one in their room. So, Mac Minis serve a wide variety of purposes depending on the need. Would I like to see it look radically different? It might be cool, but I just don't see Apple doing that unless the design of the thing really required it based on whatever specifications were changing.
And I don't think the current Mac Mini, the design is not that old. Like, it's old because they haven't made too many new Mac Minis since then, but it's got to only be 2 or 3 generations old.
Well, the Mac Mini is a classic design in the same way that the iMac is a classic design. If you go back to 1984, the iMac has always been one thing. It's been an all-in-one computer. It's been a computer that you sit on your desk, and everything is right in there: screen, CPU, everything. The only real exception to that, kind of, were the flower pot iMacs. Back in the early aughts, the ones that had the gooseneck arm that went up and down.
The picture behind you.
Right, exactly. But that was still technically an all-in-one machine. It's just that the screen was separated out from the base a little bit. But ultimately, it was still an all-in-one machine. That hasn't changed today. Now, for all intents and purposes, the screen is the machine. The iMac has shrunk in size so much that it's basically just inside a display housing. The Mac Mini, in its own way, has a very classic design. It's a small box. It started life with a lot of stuff inside of it, like a hard drive and an optical drive and a CPU and other stuff, so it needed a little bit more space. As Apple has trimmed the feature set, gotten rid of the optical drive, they were able to shrink it. They've been able to shrink it. They were able to shrink it with the optical drive in it as well. And they've been able to pack a lot more features inside of it, but it still remains a box that measures about 6.5 inches on a side, and that's a couple of inches tall. So I think the Mac Mini is going to stay with us in a form that's going to be very recognizable.
You think it'll keep, because this is the only real question for me. I think you're exactly right on all of this. I don't know if Apple would take the Mac Mini to SSD-only storage the way they've done pretty much everything else except for the old school MacBook Pro. Because I can see it 2 ways. One is that people who would like the Mac Mini are probably people who would like the option for large amounts of storage in it, but Apple seems to be happy giving people SSD and saying, hey, look, Thunderbolt, plug in your large storage here, jerk.
I don't see that happening, and it's because the iMac comes with a standard hard drive as well. I think that on that end of the desktop spectrum, it still makes a lot of sense to have a hard drive standard equipment and make the SSD optional, because SSDs improve performance dramatically, and they're more durable and more reliable than hard drives, especially for laptops where they get moved around a lot.
Especially when you drop them.
Especially when you drop them, Renee. But in the same token, the value per gigabyte is much higher for a conventional hard drive still. Unless Apple were to do something radical with the space that they would save with an SSD compared to a regular hard drive, I don't really see what the cost benefit is there. for them to go SSD only. I can't see how it would make sense.
I also like the option for Fusion Drive. I like a lot of, and it's not perfect. It's not quite as fast as one, not quite as big as the other, but I do like the option for SuperDrive. I think it's a good middle ground for a lot of people. Not SuperDrive, sorry, Fusion Drive.
Let's not forget also that the Mac Mini, again, as I said at the outset, is available in a server configuration, and that system comes with a terabyte hard drive, and you can get them, I think, you can get them in a 2 terabyte stack too, right?
I think you could. I don't know if you still can, but you could get them at one point.
You could get them like that. I'm checking now. So, the storage is still a vital part of it, especially when you're looking at a device that's acting as a server. The interesting thing about the new Mac Pro is that it's not exactly sold as a server anymore. You can install Server on any Mac just by downloading Server for $20 from the app from the Mac App Store. Don't get me wrong. But Apple really hasn't positioned the Mac Pro as a server alternative, at least not in the same way that they used to, where during the old, big box cheese grater Mac Pro days, you could order a Mac Pro with Server pre-installed and sort of set up in a server type of configuration. You can't really do that anymore. And yes, by the way, you can still get a Mac Mini with OS X Server installed, pre-installed, straight from the Mac Store for $9.99, or straight from the Apple Store online for $9.99, and that includes 2 1 terabyte hard drives. So you could RAID them, or you could use them as 2 independent disk drives, or do whatever you wanted with them. So again, I don't really see SSD only as a big selling feature for the next generation Mac Mini. It seems like pragmatically Apple would still want to be able to offer it with as cheap storage as possible.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the market, exactly what you said, the market for whom the Mac Mini is targeted would benefit greatly from that sort of flexibility in storage still.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so switching gears, you had another interesting editorial go up, Peter, where you were looking. Sketch 3 came out, which is a vector illustration program for the Mac. We've got Pixelmator and we've got Acorn for image editors on the Mac, and you started asking, where's the sort of innovative indie design page layout program? Because we had QuarkXPress and InDesign and all this, and it was really interesting to me in a couple angles. One is that one of my earliest jobs was working in desktop publishing. I started on the Amiga using PageStream, and then I was at a enterprise company, and they were a Corel shop, so I used Ventura Publisher. Then I used Quark, and finally I used InDesign. And InDesign is just a terrific program, but it's an Adobe program with all the good and bad that comes with it. And we really haven't, not only have we not seen sort of the $49.99 Mac page layout program, that's the equivalent of Sketch 3 or Pixelmator / Acorn, but we haven't really seen that much on iOS either. We've got a lot of image editors on iOS. There's even a couple vector programs on iOS. We haven't really seen page layout, and I wonder if the answer to both of those things is the niche of the market and the complexity of the job, maybe.
Partly, but I think that we're getting there too. I mean, actually, Quark has a very good page layout app for the iPad called DesignPad. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to check it out, but it's really kind of nifty. Yeah, you should. It's kind of cool. InDesign exists for me in a really interesting place in the app ecosystem because InDesign is the disruptive application that unseated a behemoth. Rewinding 20 years ago, the desktop publishing market was dominated by Quark. QuarkXPress was on every page layout, every publisher, anybody who did anything with print especially, had a copy of Quark on their machine. It was everywhere. It was ubiquitous. But the company made a whole bunch of really serious blunders. Some of it was management blunders. They brought all of their programming expertise overseas. They outsourced it to India. They changed their customer service. Their customer service got really wretched. The CEO of the company was a loony.
They just didn't update it, ever.
Yeah, and they didn't respond to what customers were asking them to do. Instead, they were expecting customers to sink money into very expensive, dedicated publishing systems for these products. and they were loathed by everyone, even though everybody had to use them. So Adobe introduced InDesign as an alternative, and of course this wasn't Adobe's first go-around with a page layout application, because they had bought PageMaker from Aldus, which was the app that invented desktop publishing.
I had to use FrameMaker for a year, Peter, which was designed to keep track of documentation for battleships.
Yeah, FrameMaker is a heavy piece of software.
Yeah.
So, PageMaker unfortunately went the way of all flesh, but InDesign wasn't a home run the first 1.0 version that came out. It wasn't even usable for a lot of people, but Adobe kept its nose to the grindstone. It knew it had a good thing, and it also had the benefit of having an ecosystem that a lot of creative professionals were already plugged into, thanks to Illustrator, thanks to Photoshop, thanks to other Adobe programs like Acrobat. It knew that it could count on that synergy with those other Adobe applications to get InDesign in the door to the same creative establishments that were using Quark at the time. And it didn't take too long before Quark was kicked by the wayside and InDesign was the heir apparent. Since then, InDesign has continued to be refined and improved by Adobe in dramatic ways, and it is a very good program, and it's an excellent program in its current iteration in Creative Cloud. But that Creative Cloud gets in some people's way, especially if, like a lot of people out there, you're a creative professional who works on a contract basis and doesn't have a corporate company to benefit, corporate business behind you to benefit from, to sink money into a subscription-based service. Admittedly, it's $50 a month. That's you can certainly write that off, but some people aren't in that boat. What is interesting to me about the whole thing is in the past couple of years, we've seen a lot of apps come on the Mac App Store that have really supplanted traditional Adobe products, and a lot of people who do creative work and who do excellent creative work are able to get away with using stuff like Pixelmator instead of Photoshop, as you were saying. Sketch 3 is remarkable. If you do vector-based illustration, you need to check this app out because it's damn cool. So this led me to the question that was the subject of the editorial that went up today, which is, where are the InDesign competitors? And what I come to find out, long story bearable, Renee, is that there really aren't any. I mean, Quark Express is technically an InDesign alternative. I'd never call Quark an indie developer.
No.
They're as establishment as Adobe is. But if you've got $850 lying around, knock yourself out. Quark Express 10.1 is a very well-developed piece of software. Quark 10, when it came out last year, was a huge upgrade for Quark. It really made a big difference in terms of how it ran and what its capabilities were. 10.1 has refined it. A lot of people who looked at 10.1 said, you know what, this is what 10.0 should have been. So now is a better time to look at Quark Express than ever and see if it does what you want it to do. And certainly it's got all of the features that anybody who does really serious page layout work might need. From there, there's this huge gap. There's a couple of specialized apps like Multi-Ad Creator Professional, for example, that fill the same niche, that are designed for pretty specific markets. Like, Multi-Ad Creator is obviously designed, as the name implies, for publishers who are doing a lot of ad work. So newspaper publishers who have to lay out a lot of advertising, or magazine publishers that need to do that sort of work. But they also have a consumer version, Creator Express, that you can download from the Mac App Store for $30. Now, the apps that I found in that niche, things like iStudio, iStudio Publisher, and Swift Publisher, are not in the same class as InDesign or Quark Express. They're, in some cases, sort of modern variants on Broderbund's the Print Shop, or even Print Explosion. Apps that enable regular people to lay out really sophisticated looking layouts, newsletters, maybe trifold newsletters, cards, sympathy cards, business cards even, magazines, newspapers in some cases, but template-based work, maybe with large amounts of clip art included, just to make your life easier when you're laying your stuff out, so you don't need a full-time illustrator creating the stuff for you. But they are squarely consumer programs. It'll be interesting.
Where Pages fits in as well, or
that is where Pages fits in, and some of these apps sort of bridge the gap a little bit between Pages and something more sophisticated like an InDesign. They have more sophisticated text management capabilities, so they have more sophisticated imagery capabilities. But Pages, at least in its iWork 09 implementation, became a very powerful page layout application, and this is what a lot of people went with. And this is why when Apple redid Pages in 2013, when they rolled out their new version of iWork after Mavericks came out, so many people were disappointed because of all three apps. Pages probably took the biggest usability hit for those people who had sort of developed a workflow around Pages from iWork 09.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I would also say that Word does not fit in this. If anyone's wondering, there's a new deal for Microsoft Office for Mac users. Basically, you can get one tablet and one Mac license, and I think it's $10 or something. But Word is not a page layout program. It's a word processing program. It is painful to try to have static page layouts in Word. So if people have done it. I've actually done books in Word, kicking and screaming, and with incredible amounts of frustration. But no human being should be forced to actually do page layout work in Word.
That's exactly it. It's funny because a few cheeky monkeys on Twitter, when I asked about this the other day, suggested Microsoft Publisher, which is a sick joke. It's a sick joke. I think that Word actually has really sophisticated page layout options, but no one would conflate Word with a page layout application.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go over some of the news of the week and some of the other stuff that's been happening. There was a rumor yesterday that Apple is investigating including Shazam-like, if not Shazam-specific, technology into iOS for music discovery. So if you're not familiar with Shazam, and you should be because it's a great app, if you hear a song playing, if you're like at Starbucks and you hear a song playing, you're out and about, anytime you hear a song playing, you like it, you want to know what it is, you just hold up the app. The app turns on the microphone, records a little bit of audio, matches the music DNA, the music fingerprint of that song, and returns to you the result. And you can buy it on iTunes or go see it on YouTube or all sorts of other things. As soon as we posted this, of course, everyone said, oh, well, I've been able to do this on Nokia phones since 1812 and Android since 1913 and Windows Phone since yesterday. Regardless of all that, this seems to me just like a highly usable feature, Peter. And it's something that obviously there's a demand for it because there's a bunch of apps that do it, but it would be something I think is a nice to have.
Shazam is an awesome app, and I use it. But the problem with Shazam is that I have to go fumbling for it every time I want to use it. So my current workflow, when I hear a song that I want to hear and I happen to have my iPhone in my hand, is usually to pull out my iPhone and then pull up Spotlight and type in Shuz and wait to see Shazam and then launch it. And that's all of 10 seconds maybe, for me to do that, but it's still more time than it should take. I would love it if I could just, for example, do something with Siri, like Siri, what's the song? And, hold it up and have her tell me. That would be cool.
Yeah, both Siri and Control Center, I think. So I always like a manual alternative because just in case Siri's having one of her days. So like, turn on Siri, turn on Control Center, grab the song. I'm sold. That's fine. I'm happy with that.
That would be really cool. I would love to see that happen. And Shazam's awesome. If you've never tried it, it will blow your mind.
The other thing, and this was just me conjecturing, this is nothing that I've actually heard about, but I was reading your articles about Interface, and we did a podcast at Macworld with Pacific Helm, Louis Mantilla, Brad Ellis, Jesse Char, Sebastian DeWitt of Double Twist, and Chris Clark of Fitbit. And one of the things that occurred to me is that we're getting such smart devices and such contextually aware devices that what I would like to start seeing is something like dynamic affordance. And what I mean by that is, iOS 7 famously stripped down so much of the Chrome, they even took the button outlines, just left naked text as a button. And then in iOS 7.1, starting in iOS 7.0.3, but in iOS 7.1, they gave us options to turn back on button outlines, for example, and do other things that would increase the accessibility. But that's a very manual toggle process for me. And I was just hoping that maybe at some point Apple could use all of this awareness and start making affordance dynamic. So an affordance, if you're not familiar with the term, if it looks like a button, that's an affordance because it makes you understand how it works. Ropes you pull, levers you pull. So it's making something look like the way that it works. And iOS 7 is very low affordance. But if I'm tapping away close to something and I keep missing it, why can't they dynamically make it bigger so that I hit it? If I'm, iOS is designed that the higher up the screen it goes, the greater the angle it thinks you're going to be hitting it at. But if I'm holding my phone, if it's on a table and I'm just trying to tap on it from the top down, or if it's upside down and I'm trying to tap a button because my friend's looking at the phone, iOS can actually see capacitance much higher off the screen. The way other companies like Nokia try to make glove detection work, it's because they can do that. Apple uses it to try to figure out what finger you're using. So maybe it could figure out the angle of my hand or the sort of placement of my hand and adjust the touch target for that kind of stuff. Maybe after a while, the same way that the slide to unlock starts to animate and appear on a 5S if you don't use Touch ID, maybe the button outlines can start to appear if it looks like you're scrolling around or tapping around and not finding your way through. And it could scale that back again. If you're going through it like a champ, it can just take off all the affordance because obviously you know what you're doing. But I just think we're getting to the point where it shouldn't be on the user to feel stressed out by an interface, and it shouldn't be a manual, I got to go in here and turn this on, turn this off, do all this, but just to let it do some of the heavy lifting for me, Peter.
Well, where does affordance start and skeuomorphism stop?
Well, is a button outline skeuomorphic? Like, it is. It absolutely is, but is it a good degree of skeuomorphism?
Right, exactly. As opposed to a hokey degree of skeuomorphism. I guess that's my first reaction. Secondly, yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, in OS 10, you can pretty extensively customize your user interface experience to do what you need to do, and that's something that and in Android 2 for that matter, and it's something that you can't really do in iOS, but the way that they've got it set in iOS, it's buried so deep that a lot of people are never going to find it. Maybe there are some smarter ways that Apple can expose those features without making you hunt for it. Absolutely.
You just made me think of an OS 10.10.10 where instead of the red, yellow, and green lozenges or little candy buttons, you had a little bit of text saying close, minimize, optimize.
So speaking of 10.10, I have kind of come up with another wish list feature that I would really like to see in 10.10.
What's that?
Well, Mavericks tagging is really cool, and it's probably a little bit of an underutilized feature for a lot of people, but Mavericks tagging lets you tag your files with meta tags so you can organize them and find them really easily. So here's a practical example. I'm planning a 25th wedding anniversary for my aunt and uncle. And actually, they've been together longer than that, but go with me here for a second. I have a lot of stuff that's associated with it. I've got emails that have come in from the wedding planner. I've got files, catalogs, menus, lots of stuff that I've collected that all kind of fits under that. And maybe they're in different places on my computer. Maybe they're not in the same folder. And there might be reasons for that, but there's stuff that I want to keep together as part of that plan. I can tag those with a conspicuous keyword like aunt and uncle's wedding, or a conspicuous series of keywords, and find this stuff very easily later. It's pretty well integrated into the operating system. What I'd love to do is some sort of what I'd love to see happening is some sort of contextual tagging. So Spotlight would index the file and would automatically tag it based on the frequency and weight of keywords.
Yeah, I sort of realized that all of this stuff is about this event and just automatically creates a place where you can find all of it.
Right, exactly, to make it easier for me to find it later on.
That reminds me of something. I don't know if you saw that because this is a sort of collection thing. They had Windows 8.1, so Windows Phone 8.1 came out this week, and Windows Phone Central did an amazing job of covering it. But one of the things, Tom Warren from The Verge noticed it right away, and then Daniel Rubino from W Central followed up on it. But you can load Passbook passes now into Microsoft Wallet. So Passbook passes, if anyone's listening is not familiar with them, they're .pk pass files, and basically they're a little bundle of JSON scripts. So you could think of them, not exactly, but they're analogous to a website that has HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and then a browser can just render that into a web page. So Passbook files have that information in it, and then the Passbook app just renders that into a card. And Microsoft basically figured out how they were rendered. It's not hard, it's basic web components, and they render them into a card and put them into Microsoft Wallet. And Passbook was designed by Apple to be a feature that makes owning an iPhone better. So I don't know if they're annoyed or upset by this, but I like the idea of this kind of stuff being everywhere, because I think this kind of technology, when cards like this are everywhere, more and more companies will use them and hopefully make them better.
Well, and here's the use case for it too. Let's say that you're a business traveler and you travel as part of a team. You can't count on everybody having an iPhone in their pocket, although it sure would be nice. The guy who's got a Windows 8.1 phone can get his Passbook file from you if you've managed to download boarding passes for everybody together. This is the sort of thing that happened to me on the way to Macworld. Bonnie and I were traveling together. I was able to download both of our boarding passes because the reservation was made at the same time, and I just airdropped her hers. Now, maybe airdrop won't work between an iPhone and a Windows phone, but there are other ways of getting the file. Bottom line is that Passbook is a great idea, and it works wonderfully for people who use it. I strongly expect that Passbook's number one use is Starbucks.
I don't disagree.
More than anything else, but it can be used in very cool ways. Concert passes, boarding passes for travel, all sorts of other stuff. It's a technology that, quite frankly, I would like to see extend out beyond Apple products, just because it is so cool.
And one of the things, unfortunately, is you can get an email with a Passbook icon on it, click on that, and it'll load into Microsoft Wallet. But Passbook also integrates with Apple's push notification service. So, for example, your boarding pass can update its gate based on a push notification. Your Starbucks card can update its balance based on a push notification. Microsoft Wallet cannot tie into Apple's push notification system. I mean, they can accept Apple's secure certificates, but they're just not on. They're not getting iOS push notifications. So maybe Microsoft can make their own version. Maybe developers would support both versions. Maybe they can just pull servers, although that sounds very brutish. So you get the pass, but you don't get the update functionality. But I think for most people, most of the time, that's not a deal breaker.
I would agree.
On the other side of the competitive aisle, the Galaxy S5 has shipped, and Ali Kazmuha, our head ninja in charge, has done a fantastic photo shoot. She took the cameras with her to JailbreakCon in San Francisco, and she put the Galaxy S5 versus the iPhone 5S versus the HTC One M8 head-to-head in a photo shootout. Great job. It's on the site. But as soon as the phone came out, Peter, we knew this was going to happen. There is a fingerprint identity scanner, actually Swiper, in Samsung's case, and the same people who successfully CSI spoof-attacked Touch ID on the iPhone were able to do the same thing with the Galaxy S5. Although there were a couple differences. One looks a bit confusing. They said that there was no limit in the amount of times that they could try to spoof the sensor, although other people who have the phone say it times out after 5 tries, the same way Touch ID does. But the bigger non-disputed differences are, for example, if you reboot an iPhone or you turn it on for the first time, you have to use a password or a passcode, and you don't on the Galaxy S5. And that may not sound like a big difference, but it just means that if your phone is ever rebooted or if it wasn't on to begin with, that attack just doesn't work. And the other thing is because Samsung, unlike Apple, made it open, there's an SDK for their fingerprint swiper, and they've partnered with people like PayPal, the company was able to use the fingerprint attack to get to your PayPal app and authorize PayPal purchases. Where on Apple, the biggest damage you could do is buy somebody stuff on their own iTunes account. So I don't know if that's. I mean, I think it's a fair comparison, but I think it also highlights how Apple thought through the Touch ID process.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that somebody can overcome a fingerprint sensor really shouldn't be a big surprise. If there's security anywhere, somebody's going to figure out a way around it. Just look at the mess with OpenSSL that we've had this past week as well. It's no big deal that the fingerprint sensor has been spoofed, but people who are comparing this to the way that Touch ID works on iOS are either being very careless or are intentionally trying to mislead their readers into thinking that there's a controversy where there isn't.
Yeah,
that's my takeaway.
No, I would agree. And Apple put out that fantastic security document, and it's 30 pages long. It's incredibly dense. Steve Gibson on Security Now on the Twit Network spent 3 episodes going through it. But I think Apple does not get enough credit for making security an absolute ironclad priority on iOS, and even things like Touch ID. You have that sensor individually locked to that secure enclave on the A7, and it goes through the serial channel to get there, and that serial channel is encrypted and tangled, and it is about as secure. I mean, as Steve calls it, I forget what he called it, a love letter to cryptography or something, but it is amazingly secure. And that comes with the cost of it being less convenient, because as we know, security is always at war with convenience. So the stuff you mentioned earlier about the customizability, like even in Mavericks on OS 10, you can do a lot more than you can do on iOS. But iOS has, aside from programming errors and social engineering, which are always possible, it is a beautifully secure system. And I think that when you weigh the pros and cons, you have to weigh the lack of customizability with the benefits of security that it gives you.
I'm inclined to agree. I think that, yeah, absolutely.
All right,
I was going to blow V8 for a moment, but I don't see any need to.
Are there any apps I'm forgetting about that we should cover, Peter? Anything awesome that came out this week?
Let's see. Anything else that came out this week that is awesome?
I know Screens 3 was updated. I'm a big fan of that.
Right, absolutely. If you are a Borderlands 2 fan, there is the very final downloadable content pack, DLC pack for it. Just came out the other day. It's the 5th installment of the Headhunters pack. It's only $2.99, and it came out the same day for Mac and Windows, so that was kind of nice.
Yeah, the other interesting thing today, Dropbox, who recently announced their Carousel photo viewing app, bought Loom, which was a very nice photo management app for iOS. I'm pretty sure sometime next year or the year after, Peter, you and I will be discussing Dropbox OS and how it compares to Chrome OS and Facebook OS and Amazon Silk OS.
Yeah, that'd be the ultimate bitch slap back to Steve Jobs, who called Dropbox a feature, not a product, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and it'll also, but I mean, Scott McNealy and Larry Ellison were talking about thin clients forever, right? They're always coming, never quite arriving, just like the future. But
right,
it'll happen. But I think that this is a sign. This is what I'm also looking for at WWDC. Is and we've talked about this before. PhotoStream and iCloud photo backup is just not a great solution yet. And other companies, whether you like Google or Facebook or Dropbox, they're providing much better, much more competitively priced photo storage now at SkyDrive, a terabyte on Flickr than Apple is doing.
Yeah, it's very true. And I mean, the downside is that, in some cases anyway, your data is being plumbed for advertisements for you. There may be other security risks too. But look, it's you can't knock it for the price for some of these, and the value is just not there for many iCloud users. I think iCloud is a much more specialized case, and you have to really kind of tailor what you're doing with it. It's not a bulk dumping ground for everything that goes on in your life, but there's no question that for a lot of people, first of all, that 5 gig limit is useless.
Yeah.
And secondly, paying for what you get, you're not getting as much as you get with other services.
And photos, like there's a lot of stuff I don't think Apple needs to take care of, but I think photos, especially because they are so good about the camera, and photos are so important to people, especially photos of your kids, of your friends, of those special moments, and they're not recoverable. Like if they're gone, they're just gone, and I think that is an area where Apple could provide a better solution.
Absolutely. Sociologically, people have gone from having big reams of photo albums sitting in their living room or their parlor, showing pictures of the kids or pictures of the grandkids, to everything on the phone. I've helped more than one customer in the store that I work in with their phone or their iPad that all of a sudden isn't working right, and they can't get pictures of their grandkids, or, oh my God, my kid's prom was in here, and I don't have it any other way. People expect that those photos are going to be around, so it not only behooves, but it's incumbent upon Apple to make that as seamless and transparent an experience as possible. And the way that they've got iCloud set up right now, they do not at all. And it's a big failure on their part. And it comes back to something I've said a number of times, Renee, in these podcasts and elsewhere. I don't think, after all said and done, that Apple still really gets the cloud at all.
Yeah, I want to see that fixed. The last thing I'll bring up is Hearthstone. Heroes of Warcraft is now available worldwide. It was Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand only for a while because we were apparently the beta testers for the world. But now everybody can get their iPad Warcraft on.
That's right. Now, Hearthstone has been out for a little while for the PC and the Mac, but it was expected for iPad too. So this is a free-to-play collectible card game, a strategy game, based on Blizzard's Warcraft universe. So if you're a World of Warcraft player, or if you like to play Magic the Gathering or any other kind of collectible card game that's got a strategy element to it, you ought to check it out. It's free to play. And it's the sort of game that you can play free-to-play for a good long time without spending any money on, so I definitely recommend checking it out. This is also Blizzard's very first game for iOS, so it'll be very interesting to see how well it's received and what Blizzard plans to do for the platform in the future.
And my only question to that, Peter, is are you a shaman like William Shatner, or are you a troll like Mr. T?
Shaman, man.
Shaman, man. Nice. We've got a bunch of great new how-tos up. Ali and Peter have been knocking those out the park. So whether you want to make your Mac safer online, or you want to learn how to clean up storage space on one of your devices, you want to make your battery last longer, all of that is just at imore.com/tips. Peter, if people want to read those articles, they want to find and follow you online, where can they go?
Go to imore.com, scroll down the right-hand side of the screen, click on my I don't know, what's the right word?
Your icon, your
my
face.
My judgmental face.
Nice. And also on Twitter, at Flarg?
Yeah, there too. Although, just remember, not safe for work. Profane.
I would suggest there's very few places where that account is safe, Peter.
Yes, this is very true. How about you, Renee? Where can they find out more about you?
imore.com, mobilenations.com. We have a ton of great podcasts. Debug, we had Ken Ferry on, Auto Layout, Passbook. Iterate's coming up with the guys from Supertop who do tokens, and the Castro podcast client. We just recorded another Debug with Sexism in Technology with a phenomenal panel. Jesse Char, Serenity Caldwell, Georgia Dow, and Brianna Wu from Revolution 60. That's going to be out on Wednesday.
Oh, I can't wait to hear that one.
And we've got Vector coming up with Jason Snell talking about digital comic books. So, and an exciting announcement, Peter. Our video version of this podcast is back. We have a new video host. RSS is updated. All of the video episodes has been yours now on RSS and iTunes again.
And we are very sorry for the very extensive and unexpected delay getting that stuff back, but we're very happy to bring it to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And other shows like Zen and Tech and Android Central will be back on as well very soon. And you can find me on all the social things at Rene Ritchie. I want to thank everyone who joined us live. It is absolutely the best way to enjoy the show and interact with us. It is every Thursday, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern, 9 p.m. British Summer Time currently. If you can't watch us live, you can watch the shows at any time. The audio version is available on iTunes and RSS. The video version is back on iTunes and RSS. And we're always at YouTube at youtube.com/imorevideo. Peter, have a great afternoon.
You too, Renee. Talk to you soon.